Okay, welcome everyone in the audience and also welcome people watching the live stream. You are, as you hopefully know, at the Don't Stop the Music, the Cold Winds Facing Culture, an event put together by Spui 25 and the Faculty of Law at the University of Amsterdam. And it is to mark the publication of Heather Kurzbauer's book, which is called Employment Vulnerabilities in the World of Orchestral Musicians, Symphonic Metamorphosis. But before I start, we're now in the introduction. We started a tiny bit late. We're now in the introduction. Before we start, I would actually like to ask, who of you plays music or makes music? Can I see hands? Okay, interesting. And who of you is a flexible worker? Can I see hands? Okay, some of them. Who of you is a member of the labor union? Also some of them. Okay, okay. And who of you is slightly worried about their job because of a possible right-wing government? Sort of. Okay, that's good. Good to know who's in the room. Okay, so my name is Harriet Bergman. I'm a philosopher and an activist, but tonight I'm the moderator of this event. In terms of art and activism, I used to work with an organization called Fossil Free Culture. We were not busy with employment issues, but we're busy with fossil fuel sponsorship in cultural institutions, so it's slightly different. And I'm here as a replacement of Eva Peek, who sadly couldn't make it tonight. So yesterday I got a call, and then I was like, I'm super excited to moderate. Let's see how it goes. So that's about me. If I am a bit weird during the moderation, it's because I heard it yesterday. But I'm super honored to be here tonight because we have three very good speakers for a very important subject. And the first... the program will be as follows. First we will have a short lecture kind of thing from Heather. Then we have a shorter lecture kind of thing from Martin Kotman. And then, where are my notes? And then, and then Caroline Kartens will introduce her work for freelance musicians also. And then with those three speakers, we will have a panel discussion. But what's first is Heather Kurzbauer. So she is the writer of Employment Vulnerabilities in the World of Orchestral Musicians. She is also a senior lecturer at the University of Amsterdam and has performed in leading Dutch orchestras. She reported on music festivals and competitions for a wide variety of media and was corresponding editor at Straat magazine. And for her research that will be presented today, she was awarded a Heiman Fellowship, and all of that work turned into a book, which is why we're here tonight. So it's an honor to introduce to you the first speaker of tonight. A big round of applause, please, for Heather Kurzbauer.
Thank you very much. It is more than an honor to stand here in front of this room full of people and also those of you who are listening or following online. I was tempted to start with a repetition of the title of tonight's very open and very improvised, like good musicians, we can improvise, talk. And I was going to start with, please don't stop the music. And all of a sudden I thought, uh-oh, copyright infringement. Because if we step out of the classical world, that certainly has another connotation. And I thought, uh-oh, I might have some lawyers in here, so no, please don't stop the music. We're not going to work with please. We're just doing a don't stop the music. Just about a year and a half ago, I was privileged to defend my PhD dissertation next door at the Aula. It had a slightly different title and certainly a slightly different girth. I realize I need to go back to the sports school when I look at this. This, you can do a compare and contrast. This was my dissertation, and you can see much of it was a product of spending a lot of time during lockdown and working. It was quite XXL, and thanks to the angels at Cultuur, I got to put it on a major diet, and that is the result of the major diet. which I guess I'm supposed to be announcing in a very, shall we say, backstage way. It is available for sale tonight at a hefty discount, and royalties go directly to two sources: Platform for Freelance Musicians, more on that later, and also the American Federation of Musicians Fund, pension fund for unemployed musicians. I realize that one should put one's money where one's heart is. Anyway, aside from that, you might ask what I researched. Once upon a time in the West, I was an extremely lucky person to land in this country from my native United States and to actually get a series of amazing, wonderful orchestra jobs. The last of which, well, at present I am playing in a group called Symfonie Rotterdam, but my 26 years were spent at one of our fantastic radio orchestras, Radio Kammerorkest, which was, and that was the source of my angst and the source of my research, it was brutally dissolved, destroyed, or I guess the euphemism is reorganized, in 2012 as a result of many things, but one major thing was in this marvelous country in which art and culture is highly subsidized. And when I arrived here in, oh Lord, I am an old person, in the mid-'80s, and it seemed like you could absolutely have such a rich cultural life and live from art. All of a sudden, fast forward to the 21st century, and we had marvelous State Secretary of Culture who announced, Halbe Zijlstra, I promised I wouldn't say his name and somehow it fell out, who politicized culture and called it a left-wing hobby, a linkse hobby. And with that sword in his hand and in political hands, it became okay to cut culture. The Dutch have a wonderful word, kaalslag, and I can't translate it. I'm not smart enough right now. But it means you turn into a barren field instead of a fruitful field. And it was okay just to slash the culture budget, not only in my wonderful itsy-bitsy tiny sector, the orchestral sector, but all across the boards. So we're looking at dance, we're looking at art, we're looking at theater. Everything suffered under major cuts. And I began to ask myself, how is this possible? In the States, we always looked up to Europe and looked up to countries like the Netherlands, where art was subsidized, where you didn't have to get down on your knees and hope for some philanthropist to open his or her wallet and give you a lot of money so that you could survive. In this country, wow, and in many other European countries, the government was able to do this for you. And my fascination, or my obsession, started with that idea of what happens when that stops, and who all is responsible. And I thought to set the stage appropriately, I would start from what I knew, which was really grassroots. I knew the musicians, I knew the stakeholders. I could talk to musicians in both my homeland, America, and here, and find out how they viewed what was happening to them, and then talk to managers and talk to, across the boards, many, many different parts of this kaleidoscope. And in doing that, I realized that what I was looking at was much more than follow the money, follow the financing, point your finger at politicians and say, you're bad, you took this away from us, you broke our toys. It wasn't only that. And what this turned out to be, and thanks forever to my promoters, but also especially Professor Beryl ter Haar, who said, Heather, you're doing a vulnerability study. At first I had to Google it and figure out what a vulnerability study was. But employment vulnerabilities, kwetsbaarheden in Dutch, looks at not only external factors like finances and like legislation that might say A, but the effect is B. It does not have the desired effect of the legislation. It is not only a sociological trend, but it can also be an internal vulnerability. And for those of us who make music, who make art, etc., for most of us, the basic internal vulnerability is that no matter what, We want to play, we want to dance, we want to sing, we want to compose, whether we get paid or not. And this turns into a problematic situation. If you're going to go to that cold church and sing the Messiah with all your heart and soul, and you get paid what the Dutch would say a krentenbol, a raisin bun, and you still do it because you really want to sing, then in employment terminology, we've all got a problem, not just the one who goes out there and sings. So I looked at the external, follow the money. I spent a lot of words on something called cost disease. It's an import from two economists from Princeton University in the US. And cost disease was basically, if you're not efficient, even in the making of culture, you will fail and you will not be cost efficient. Oh, Lord have mercy if you're not cost efficient, especially nowadays. And what that meant, and literally they used the metaphor of a string quartet, that if you take a string quartet of, name the composer, doesn't matter who, Beethoven, and that quartet, you cannot play more efficiently, the four people playing the quartet, cannot be more efficient nowadays than they were 40 years ago, then actually that product suffers from cost disease. Sounds horrible. We turn music into a disease. Anyway, speaking is necessity, listening is art. Who knows where that quote came from? Google time. Goethe. I would love to play my first musical excerpt, because of course you can't have an evening about music without music. First excerpt, please. It's really short. I wanted to end on a major key, but that didn't work out. The reason I'm playing this wonderful opening of Haydn's Farewell Abschied Symphony, there's a reason behind it. It's a metaphorical tip of the hat to not only a marvelous composer, but to the fact that Haydn also suffered employment problems with his great 18th century orchestra in Esterházy on the Austro-Hungarian borderlands. The patron of that orchestra was demanding that the musicians played over 12 hours a day. I'm looking at my union people. And that 3 months of the year they would be absent from their families and have to play at another palace, not the palace around where their families lived. And Haydn said, "Oh, my lord, what can I do? I can't attack my patron, but I will write a symphony where we will stage a walkout." And in this symphony, written into the score, is, in the last movement, the musicians walk off stage. And I discovered, thank God bless the National Library of Budapest in Hungary, I found actually evidence that this is not a myth that we have been fed all our musical lives, that this actually happened. And Haydn wrote about it. Auf Deutsch. So in the last movement, if I can get the second fragment, you will see what's left on stage are two players. And we'll just hear like 30 seconds of two players. And I want to ask you the question, can you tell if they're fully employed or freelancers? That's going to open my next door. This is the end of the symphony. There are two left. Thank you very much. Just an illustration. I bet you can't tell. And you can't tell if a side-by-side worker sitting next to a fully employed worker, if they're doing exactly the same thing, what should that mean in terms of their employment? And that's actually at the crux of what I researched. And I also looked into a lot of, coming from my homeland, from the US, a lot of legislation gone wrong. A lot of cases in which not only musicians but other cultural workers decided to go to court for discriminatory cases, gender discrimination, orchestras where women earned 40% less than men, side-by-side jobs. Ageism, and not to speak of racism, we'll get to that later, but I also tip of the hat to Me Too, which of course is ever more au courant. But I looked at a lot of those issues as well under the hat of vulnerabilities. And to reiterate, I love holding up things, I looked at things through a historical, economic, cultural policy, legal, and managerial point of view. Enough about me. I want to, just before this very brief introduction moves into what this should be about, because we stand on the shoulders of greatness, and two of the panelists who I brought with me are people to whom I owe a great deal, because they opened a research world for me, and their activism and what they have done for the music world in this country is something that I could never thank other than to put them in a spotlight tonight. But before we do that, and while I leave you with questions such as, is music making work? How should workplace culture in the orchestra stand to protect its musicians when it's under great financial strain? And many other questions that I have, I need to play another fragment. And this fragment will lead us into a discussion of what happens if a cold right-wing wind blows to the country. It comes from a piece written by Louis Andriessen in 1976, De Staat, based on Plato's Republic. I have to mention something about Louis Andriessen, and that is, and I'm reading a quote, "This former enfant terrible of Dutch music spent his career attempting to make the classical political." And I find it very apt now to play an excerpt entitled "The Intensity and Violence of the State Returns." And as you listen carefully, I will then later pose some questions. I find this more than apt side by side with Haydn. Thank you. I wanted to end right there. Before we move to our panel, I have a few questions based on the listening you have just done. Why is diverse and fair cultural practice so important? Do we need a paradigm shift? Do we need action or just a little nudge? What do you think would move us as those who are passionate to keep variegated culture alive in this gem of a country? What do you think we need? How can we set standards of expectation to trigger what comes next? And last but not least, what happens if we attempt to push for change and there's political pullback? I hope our very rich and variegated panel will help to answer some of these questions and stimulate further questions. I could go on about this for another 10 years, but I do know that we have something of a schedule, something that musicians need to get better at. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Heather, for changing an enormous book into a slightly smaller book, into a very short and concise introduction. Very interesting also. I now want to give the floor to the second speaker of this panel, of this night, Martin Kotman, and he will speak in Dutch for about 10 minutes. Are there people who don't speak Dutch? Wow, what a delight. We will briefly summarize it after the lecture for the live stream people, because I can't see them. Maybe people want to look back at it later and then they want to know what he said. But he will speak for 10 minutes in Dutch. He has been active in the fields of education and culture and has advocated for workers in both these fields. He was employed by the National Support Institute for Arts Education and as a director of FNV, so the Dutch labor union, the big Dutch labor union, FNV Media en Cultuur. He was an advocate for workers in many art disciplines with a focus on classical music. Applause please for Martin Kotman.
Goedenavond, Martin Kotman ben ik. En ik doe het in het Nederlands, omdat ik denk dat als ik het in het Engels zou doen, dat ik daar niemand een plezier mee doe. Mezelf niet, maar u ook niet. Dus ja, ik wil het met u hebben over het versterken van de arbeidsmarktpositie van muzici. Het boek van Herder gaat over de kwetsbaarheden. En volgens mij leiden die kwetsbaarheden tot 3 centrale thema's. Financiering, subsidieafhankelijkheid is zo'n kwetsbaarheid. Flexibele arbeidsverhoudingen is een kwetsbaarheid. En normen die op de arbeidsmarkt heersen is een kwetsbaarheid. Wat de eerste betreft, de afhankelijkheid van subsidie. Als we het hebben over de grote symfonieorkesten in Nederland, gaat daar een subsidievolume van 8 à 9 miljoen per orkest. En in zijn totaliteit komt dat uit op ongeveer zo'n 62 miljoen, wat onderdeel is van de basisinfrastructuur. En dan gaat het over grote symfonieorkesten van 80 tot 100 FTE's. En dat is niet onbelangrijk, 80% daarvan, van het subsidievolume, gaat op aan de begroting van personeelslasten. Waar het gaat over de flexibele arbeidsverhoudingen, en dan hebben we het met name over onzekere contracten. Meer dan 60% van de werkenden in de culturele sector is werkzaam op basis van flexibele contracten en contractvormen die onzeker zijn qua inkomen en natuurlijk ook de werkbestendigheid van het werk. Een groot aandeel van deze contracten zijn dus flexcontracten en daarnaast zijn er in de sector heel veel zelfstandigen zonder personeel, ZZP'ers genoemd, werkzaam. Arbeidscontracten voor onbepaalde tijd zijn vooral in de structureel gefinancierde orkesten aan de orde. Ik heb me daar altijd over verbaasd. Niet in de zin van dat ik dat een slechte zaak vond, integendeel zelfs. Maar als je kijkt naar het gemiddelde orkest, daarin zitten toch heel vaak muzici met een carrière van 30 tot soms wel 40 jaar naast elkaar. En ja, in de verbazing zat hem dan vooral in het feit van hoe kun je het inderdaad op zo'n kritisch moment zo lang met elkaar uithouden. Maar dat is even een zijstapje. Maar het is wel vooral een sector, en dat zal ik straks nog even nader op inzoomen, waar je wel nu van ziet dat daar ook meer en meer flexibiliteit tot stand komt. En ik zal het straks nog even nader duiden waar het dan precies uit bestaat. En heel belangrijk is ook natuurlijk ook hoe gaan we met elkaar om op die arbeidsmarkt. Wat zijn de normen? Welke regelgeving beïnvloedt het gedrag op de arbeidsmarkt? Nou ja, het doel van heel veel hervormingen op dit moment is om die arbeidsmarkt zeg maar beter te laten functioneren. En dan is natuurlijk de vraag, wat is beter functioneren? Er is in de afgelopen periode veel wetgeving tot stand gekomen. Denk aan de wet arbeidsmarkt in balans. het rapport van de commissie Borslap, waarbij zeg maar de arbeidsmarkt werd gereduceerd tot 3 toelaatbare vormen, namelijk het aloude arbeidscontract, de opdrachtovereenkomst en de uitzendovereenkomst. En dat zouden dan zeg maar in de basis goedgekeurde contractvormen zijn. En dat rapport van de commissie Borslap heeft al een aanzet gegeven tot het opstellen van een middellange termijn advies voor de arbeidsmarkt, zoals dat ook in de Sociaal-Economische Raad tot stand is gekomen. En dat zal ons, denk ik, nog in de komende periode behoorlijk bezig gaan houden, waar het gaat over hoe de arbeidsmarkt is georganiseerd en welke flexibele en minder flexibele contracten daar tot stand kunnen komen. Last but not least, het CER en de Raad voor Cultuur hebben zich gevormd in de passie gewaardeerd. Daar zit het vooral over de vraag van hoe kunnen wij de arbeidsmarkt in de culturele sector anders inrichten. En daar is ook een uitvoerige arbeidsmarktagenda uit voortgekomen die uitgevoerd wordt door PACT. Ik heb al een seintje gekregen, dus ik zal proberen om mij zo snel mogelijk er doorheen te wurmen. Financiering heeft kansen en bedreigingen. De kansen die zitten hem vooral in zeg maar vermindering van subsidieafhankelijkheid. Hoewel, en dat wil ik wel graag met u delen, ik vind dat het marktdenken in de culturele sector grotendeels is mislukt. Maar daarnaast moet ook gekeken worden naar andere inkomstenbronnen, kaartverkoop, sponsoring en niet te vergeten de geefwet, de fiscaal gefaciliteerd mecenaat. Stabielere financiering is ook aan de orde. De subsidies, de basissubsidies zullen ook op de schop gaan. Of dat precies de uitkomst krijgt die de sector ervan hoopt, is nog maar zeer de vraag. En uitbreiden van het totale subsidievolume en de BIS, nu 62 miljoen voor de orkesten, 9 orkesten en 6 miljoen voor ensembles. Dat is ongeveer wat er op het spel staat. En dan kom ik ook meteen bij de bedreigingen. Een van de thema's van vanavond was natuurlijk ook van wat gaat een nieuw kabinet doen? Wat gaat een rechtskabinet doen? En de verwachting is bezuinigen. Of dat ook in de zin van directe bezuinigingen zullen zijn, is nog zeer de vraag. Omdat er misschien ook nog wel wat tegenkrachten in het kabinet zitten. Maar verandering zit hem vooral ook in de reikwijdte van cultuur. Hoe kijkt men tegen cultuur aan? Wat vindt men belangrijk vanuit het perspectief van de bevolking? En dan zie je bijvoorbeeld, en dan slaat je toch de schrik om het hart. En overigens niks ten nadele daarvan gezegd, maar het subsidiëren van carnavalsoptochten en kabietschieten, dat is dan zeg maar het idioom waarmee met name in de rechtse kringen wordt gewerkt, waar het gaat over de reikwijdte van het begrip cultuur. En last but not least, ook de regionalisering, die speelt daarbij een belangrijke rol. Meer geld vanuit de Randstad naar de regio is ook een inzet die de Raad voor Cultuur op dit moment pleegt. Eigenlijk wel meer geld voor cultuur in zijn algemeenheid. Om juist ook dit verdelingsvraagstuk het hoofd te kunnen bieden. Maar als de koek zoals die er nu uitziet op een andere manier wordt verdeeld door meer geld naar de regio te schuiven, heeft dat zonder meer betekenis, ook voor de muzieksector, en zeker in de Randstad. En of ook daarbij de regio wordt ontzien is nog maar zeer de vraag. Nou, even over die flexibele arbeidsverhoudingen nog. Orkesten en een deel van de ensembles en koren maken gebruik van vaste arbeidscontracten, heb ik al gezegd. Geregeld in een collectieve arbeidsovereenkomst. Voor sommige politici heel verbazingwekkend dat muzici ook gewoon een collectieve arbeidsovereenkomst kunnen hebben. Geen uitbreiding van de ketenbepaling staat daarin. Maar risico's in de financiële bedrijfsvoering in combinatie met artistiek-programmatische belangen bepalen de mate van interne flexibiliteit in die sector. Remplaçanten zijn vooral mensen met die op tijdelijke basis voor een orkest werkzaam zijn, hebben ook een rechtspositie die geregeld is in een aparte collectieve arbeidsovereenkomst. De ketenbepaling is in die CAO opgerekt tot wat ook in juridische zin acceptabel is. En dat is om goede redenen. Verbeterde arbeidsvoorwaarden, onder andere eerlijke beloning door effect van de wet arbeidsmarkt in balans. Die wet zegt namelijk dat de muzici, ik zeg het maar even heel kort door de bocht, dat de arbeidsvoorwaarden van muzici in vaste diensten in gelijke mate moeten worden toegepast op de contracten voor tijdelijke dienst. En dat zijn dus de remplaçanten. Nou, nog even over die normering en het gedrag. Dat is streng, hè? Ondernemersrisico's van orkestorganisaties, die worden meer en meer onderwerp op de werkvloer. En ik vind het belangrijk dat daarbij in de gaten gehouden worden dat niet het spreadsheet, maar de menselijke maat de lijn van de dingen zou moeten zijn. Discussies over de inhoud van de CAO, het niveau van de arbeidsvoorwaarden, vermindering van de subsidie leidt tot aanpassing van de regels met betrekking tot inzetbaarheid en beschikbaarheid. Efficiency, dat is het toverwoord erbij. Meer flexibiliteit, niet zozeer in de sfeer van contracten, maar veel meer in de sfeer van interne flexibiliteit. Groepen worden ingekrompen en meer tijdelijke inzet van muzici als mede. Het leidt tot meer tijdelijke inzet van muzici. Want ja, de componist schrijft toch voor dat je met een bepaalde bezetting een bepaald stuk moet uitvoeren. Dus ja, dan betekent dat je als je die mensen niet in dienst hebt, moet je ze inhuren. Nou, dat zijn remplaçanten. Negatieve druk op primaire arbeidsvoorwaarden, salaris en vergoedingen, maar ook op de arbeidsomstandigheden. Minder ruimte voor goed personeelsbeleid, duurzame inzetbaarheid, scholing en ontwikkeling. Nou, en wil ik nog even, ook al kom ik daar een beetje over de tijd heen, aangeven van hoe ik denk die kwetsbaarheid te kunnen verminderen. Collectieve afspraken, dat is daarbij het toverwoord. Die ook structureel bijdragen aan het veranderen van niet acceptabele normen en leiden naar een duurzame gedragsverandering. Hoe? Uitwerking van normen in overleg met de overheid. Dan heb je het over wetgeving. Wet arbeidsmarkt in balans heeft een bijdrage geleverd aan de verbetering van de arbeidsvoorwaarden en arbeidsomstandigheden van met name remplaçanten. Financiering van wetgeving die de positie van werkenden weer in balans brengt met andere actoren, onder andere de werkverschaffers en de subsidiegevers. Voer een arbeidsmarktagenda uit, opgesteld naar aanleiding van de passie gewaardeerd. Zo concreet mogelijk. Pas de Fair Practice Code toe in de praktijk. Maak bindende afspraken over fair pay. Afspraken verankeren met een zo strikt mogelijk geformuleerde juridische documenten. En dat zeg ik niet zonder reden. Omdat er ook sprake is van het sluiten van sectorconvenanten. Die partijen binden. Zijn die rechtens afdwingbaar, handhaafbaar? Dat is de grote vraag. Sluit sector-cao's. Dat kunnen ook cao's zijn die bijvoorbeeld ook tarieven van zelfstandigen kunnen regelen. Regel primaire en secundaire arbeidsvoorwaarden, maar maak ook afspraken over andere arbeidsmarktrelevante onderwerpen, zoals duurzame inzetbaarheid, arbeidsomstandigheden en medezeggenschap. En dan ben ik echt aan het slot. Voor het maken van afspraken kunnen arbeidsmarktpartijen die de kwetsbaarheid van werkenden en muzici op de arbeidsmarkt kunnen verminderen en tegelijkertijd artistieke ontwikkeling niet in de weg staan, is machtsbalans op die arbeidsmarkt nodig. In muzikale organisaties nog meer dan anders. Omdat het daar soms om hele andere dingen gaat dan om arbeidsvoorwaarden. Als het artistieke aan de orde is. En dat schijnt op een of andere manier toch zijn impact te hebben op de manier waarop de macht in dat soort organisaties, en die macht En die ongelijke machtsverdeling leidt tot kwetsbaarheid. Hoe kun je dat voorkomen? Ledenorganisaties, verenigingen die collectieve macht en tegenmacht in de praktijk kunnen organiseren. Dat is een van de belangrijkste. Zelf ben ik vertegenwoordiger van een vakorganisatie. Maar ik denk dat het aansluiten van werkenden in de sector bij een vakorganisatie zeer noodzakelijk is om die machtsbalans te kunnen herstellen. Een strenge en stevige permanente lobby is nodig. Kwalitatief goede regelgeving die op de arbeidsmarkt ook uitvoerbaar is en indien nodig ook handhaafbaar is. En implementeer de Fair Practice Code. Waardeer de passie en ga daar in de praktijk ook zorgvuldig mee om.
Yeah. So now I was a bit afraid, can Heather summarize this in 1 minute? Because it was a bit longer than I expected, but very interesting. So thank you for that. Heather, please summarize it very quickly for the people at the live stream. Don't take too long because everybody here was there.
Everybody there was here. I'm going to maybe stand on one leg. No, this is a reference to something else. If I can do this on one leg, then I can get down. Bravo, Martin. You absolutely summarize about 99% of my book, but much more eloquently than I could. Very basically, some of the major points brought across were there 3 themes to focus on for vulnerabilities. I'm looking at my scratchy notes I took. You have to look at the finances, of course, good employment, good practice employment, and norms and the rules to regulate that good employment. And much of this rests on the shoulders of fair pay. You have to pray for fair pay these days. Wonderful facts that came to the fore. 80% of subsidy goes to personnel costs in orchestras. And then, of course, there was a great discussion on freelancers, dependent on flexible contracts, and the ZZ payers, the self-employed. But very important in this whole discussion was focus also on the legislative, the VAB, which is the law of work in balance. VAB, Werkarbeidbalans. Yeah. I got it. I wrote it in Dutch, and now I'm trying to translate my own Dutch. And what you have in a legislation like this is, of course, the whole fair pay is laid out, in which freelancers, side-by-side workers, and we could go into the law business, the FNV case, side-by-side workers have to be paid the same as their fellow side-by-side workers. But some of the what can often happen is, be careful what you wish for, and something I've outlined in several interviews, that fair practice is not always fair. That's for later discussion. Martin also brought up a wonderful passie gewaardeerd, the value of passion. I believe it was 2017 when the Seren Raad for Cultuur, a culture council, came out with that document. How can we best organize culture so that we value what is so important in culture? And thinking of the cold winds that might blow in, not only with a right-wing government here, but Lord forbid in my own homeland, the United States, how do we put a firmness to tie fair pay to legislation if there's an environment in which, God bless Carnival, it seems like a great holiday, but if money should go to celebrating Carnival rather than culture in its broadest sense, these are challenges. If broad culture is linked to the greater population, then we have to think of a different way to put value on music. And not only music, but the rest of the arts, so that there is no split between high culture and low culture, that there is a true value to the making of modern music, etc. And of course, Martin, as a union person, spoke a lot about CLAs, collective labor agreements, how to make those more, how to humanize them. And he spoke about the hierarchy that often managements do not listen enough to their musicians, and there should be a cross-sectionality in that field, something which I talk about in many, many pages. Thank you so much.
So that was 2 times applause for the same words. I can see you're all working with musicians, because Martin tried to give us the best listening experience by speaking in Dutch, and then to make sure that the people in the live stream could also understand it, we again re-articulated it. The next speaker will be in English. It's Caroline Karstens. She studied classical singing at the Royal Conservatoire, opera at the Dutch National Opera Academy, and law at the University of Leiden, where she is currently a student. She is one of the founders of Platform for Freelance Musici, a foundation that advocates for the rights of freelance musicians. But besides that, she was also a secretary for the Creatieve Coalitie, an association that unites 45 organizations advocating for the rights of over 40,000 artists in the Netherlands. But she also has performed as a soloist in over 35 world premieres and works presently as a soprano in the chorus of the Dutch National Opera. Applause, please, for Caroline Karstens.
Thank you, Harriet. Perhaps nice to know that the opera company I'm working for has been elected the most sustainable opera company in the world, so that's your thing. When I was 28 years old, I was at the summit of my personal career, Olympus. I had won prizes. I just obtained my first role at the National Opera, and my agenda was full with all artistically very rewarding performances and pieces. And at that moment, where I thought I could not grow bigger, I earned 8,000 euros a year. And that was my self-employment fee. So that meant that all taxes had to go off that as well. So I soon found out that I was not the only one who was in that position, and actually that most freelance musicians were actually suffering from the same problem as me. We were doing very interesting work for very little pay and all with a lot of love, but yeah, we could not really live from it. My parents were very worried, as were the parents of a lot of other people. And when I was a little older, I decided to apply for the freelance position in the chorus of the National Opera, and I was very lucky to be accepted. And from that moment on, I earned a little bit more, because we were paid more than the interesting solo work I was doing before that. But still, if I would speak to my colleagues and we were talking about the wages we were earning, we were still earning, I believe it was 23.45 euros an hour, and that was our self-employment fee. Well, you can imagine that for somebody who has been studying 10 years and won prizes, and I was not the only one. All the people surrounding me were of very high quality, but we were earning very, very little. So we decided to do what Martin has just advised all of you to do. We decided to unite each other. So we started to talk with all the freelancers in the chorus, which were about 75 people at that moment. And we talked about what our worries were. We felt that we had too little money to really get by, but that we also didn't have time enough to do something about it. And we were afraid to stick up for ourselves, because there were a lot of people who would like to do the same work as we were doing, and perhaps they could even do it in the same manner. And therefore, we always felt like, okay, if I say no to a job, there's always somebody else who wants to do it. So a great amount of fear amongst all of us. But we found power in uniting. And first, not all the freelancers did dare to come to the meetings even. They were afraid that if the company would find out that we were having these kind of meetings, that they would become persona non grata, which was luckily not the case. The company has been very supportive to us united, and I was happy with that. So after having a little bit of talks and working on the trust amongst each other, we decided to come up with a plan. So we made a plan in which we strive to go to the same wages as our colleagues in fully employed colleagues as they were earning. And we first had to know how much that was, which was not a very easy calculation to make, because if you work in a chorus and you earn, like, for instance, perhaps 35 euros an hour or 28 euros an hour, but you get paid 40 hours a week. But we as freelancers, we could never work 40 hours a week. We could only work the maximum hours which were written down in the schedule for that year, which was a lot less. But we did make the calculations. We managed to discover that we actually, if we wanted to earn the same amount of money as our colleagues who are fully employed, we would have to ask double, or even more than double, of what we were earning at the moment. So we wrote this plan, and we said to the company, okay, we don't want to get you bankrupt or anything, so we would like kindly to ask you to work to that amount within 5 years. And to our great surprise, they said yes. And but then of course the WAP happened, and everything got in, and the Commissie Borslap came with a report, and everything came into a stroomversnelling, don't know the English word, a faster current. And it went a lot better. So, in 2020, finally there was the moment where the freelancers in the opera company earned the same amount of money as the people in fixed jobs. When I was doing that for the freelancers with my colleagues, I also thought, like, how cool would it be if we could get something like this happening for all freelance musicians in Holland, not only the opera chorus members. And at that moment, Dorine Schoon, my colleague at the Platform for Freelance Musicians, she started a Facebook page. And that page had grown within a month to 350 musicians who really wanted to do something about solidarity and about getting better treated, etc. So we decided to fund the Platform for Freelance Musicians, and we did. And within 2 years, that organization grew to about 3,500 freelance musicians in Holland. We decided not to become an association or a union, because there are already unions. And if you are an association, you have to do what the members want you to do, and you have to do collective bargaining. What we wanted to become was more of an addition to that. So we decided to become a foundation with a goal. And our goal is to keep music in Holland for the future by sticking up for the most vulnerable people in music, which are the freelance musicians. And what we have learned by these things is that we absolutely need data. If it's not on paper, it doesn't exist. We have this numerous accountancy bureaus who are being paid really a lot of money for writing papers which policymakers can use to underbuild their claims, etc. So we needed that. And that's also why we're so grateful to Heather, because that's exactly what you did. You build data, and it's not it's a lot of data. And it's introducing the problem of the freelance musician into science, which is very vulnerable, I think, for the thing we're working on. So that's what we do with the freelance musicians. We're now invited everywhere, and we try to make our case clear. You see also in the news when they're talking about problems about self-employed, you see a cello in the background. Before that, the problem didn't exist. People were watching a musician in the Concertgebouw, and they were thinking, like, okay, this person is living in Wassenaar and has just like this big BMW and lives in a villa. But yeah, mostly people live on the 4th floor, and they only have like 40 square meters and a bike. So it's a whole different story. And where we try to raise awareness about. So, to complete my story, I really believe that change starts with solidarity and with uniting, but also that we should be careful with not being played out against one another. We as freelance musicians, we've been often played out against the people in the fixed jobs, by saying, like, okay, if we pay you more, then we have to pay them less. And but that's not the narrative. It's the other way around. If I do the same job for less than half of the price, then the person who's doing the job for the full price has a big problem, which Heather also talked about. So in that case, as a girl from the south, I'm from Maastricht and I celebrate Carnival, I don't believe to say like, okay, Carnival is fine, and of course there should be money going to things like Carnival and to Karbietschiet and everything. But it doesn't mean that it has to be taken away from the budget that we have. The budget needs to be bigger. So spend 2% of the national income on culture and give a lot of money to Carnival, but also preserve nice other things like opera and orchestras. Thank you.
So, I think it's already quite clear why this book is needed, right? There's power in data, we need this data, and there is kind of a problem within the musical sector. But if I may start, why did you start writing the book, Heather?
Well, to be honest, I started out of sheer despair because I discovered I was in a country that supported, that loved culture, Europe, etc., high culture, could go on forever about this. And then all of a sudden with one, as they say in Dutch, pennenstreep, with one just line through a budget, you could actually make it all disappear. And you could open that can of worms, that there's such a thing as high culture, low culture. You know, I thought, give me a break. Let's shake this up and mix it. That we need to get, as the Dutch would say, all our noses in one direction and embrace culture in its widest sense. So I started out of desperation and frustration and ended up thinking, all right, let's contribute. Bureaucrats will not open wallets unless there's data. So, let's be honest. Let's provide something like data to make them realize that not only in a monetary sense, but, it's actually good to have a variegated, wide culture. Wild is probably belongs in that sentence as well. So that's why I did it.
And Martin, why did you think the book was needed? You can get a microphone.
I think that the book was needed because of the situation where musicians are in right now. That situation is needed a change, and therefore it's necessary that Heather pointed to the point where get united and get your solidarity on order to each other, because there's one thing that I in this situation often see is it's the greatness, the joy of the profession. That's one good thing, but it's also stands in the way to make things better for themselves, and that's why I think the book is very much needed. To point that to make that as a point in the discussions.
Is that also so? This joy that people get out of their job, right? It's not just a job; it's also your passion to sing. It's your passion to make music. But that is what you identify as one of the internal vulnerabilities. Is that also something you recognized?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I believe that it all starts with financial independence, and we have a lot of problems in music, like the Me Too problems. And if you, if you're not earning enough money, then you can never say no to something. So you're always accepting, and you're always in the demanding state. And sometimes you even get told, like, but yeah, you like doing this, right? So why should I pay you a fair wage? And now that fair practice has become a real thing, and fair pay as well, companies are obliged to do so. And sometimes you hear that they say that they're getting problems because now they have to pay a fair wage, and they're not being compensated enough for that by the government. But it's actually the other way around, because before there was fair practice, it was the musicians itself who had been the biggest subsidizers of music. And that is something that we have to realize. We have to be grateful for what musicians have done in the past, and we have to be very grateful that we pay them a fair wage now.
So there's this narrative, right, of if you work in the cultural sector, if you work in the arts, you have to be grateful for the subsidies, but you say, well, actually people have been working for so little money that it's actually the other way around. The workers have subsidized the government by working for so little money.
Yeah, you could actually see that way, yeah. Perhaps not that they have been subsidizing the government, but they have been subsidizing culture or the hobbies of the people in the audience, yeah.
And what other vulnerabilities, so this is a clear vulnerability of calling out people for their passion. If you would be, I see several, I see similar problems, for example, in education, right? Like, if you love your students, then you'll work longer hours. If you like healthcare so much, if you want to treat people respectfully, you'll work longer hours, etc. So that's a way in which people's passion for their job makes them vulnerable. What other vulnerabilities did you recognize that you see back in the work of Martin and Caroline?
Well, the list starts here. We can start with, just plain old discrimination. For example, there was a statistic, I believe 2 weeks ago, that I was, following this passionately in the Dutch press, that women freelancers in all fields, this is not just culture, this is all fields, earn categorically 16% less than men. I had to breathe in, breathe out. And then when I heard on Radio 1, on Dutch radio, people responding saying, yeah, but of course, we can't change this. I said, not only is that a statistic, but it's accepted. Well, we've known this forever, and it won't change. I said, but this is such a forward-thinking country. I mean, we're not in the great state of Alabama. We're in the Netherlands. And how, that reference was very direct to what just happened in Alabama. But this was, I couldn't believe it. Or that kind of discriminatory practice, and that's not to go. I don't go very deeply in my book about Me Too for many, many reasons, but I do bring it up because there's we could talk forever about the Me Too culture within or without a cultural field, and you all know it from pop culture, but also within the classical world. This is an ongoing issue, and this is something to be dealt with, and often the acceptance of, well, it's part of the package. You've signed up to be an artist, so get with the program, and that's something that I think also with very strict rules and CLAs, collective labor agreements, CAO's in Dutch, and very, very strict management practices which are now in place. And God bless the orchestras nowadays. Change is here. So there are some very positive notes, if I can.
Yeah, if I may add to that, it's also that Platform Act, who has been in charge of making the Arbeidsmarktagenda, has also recently developed a tool for freelance musicians to calculate a fair wage. So that's for all the musicians in the hall. It's interesting to look it up.
And so I hear you say that there is this that the people see things, or the mistreatment maybe that they experience as part of a package deal, right? Like, if you want to become big or live as a musician, either way, this is part of the deal. Does that make it more difficult to organize? And then I'm looking at both of you. Did you, in trying to organize musicians, either freelance or union members, was this an obstacle in organizing them?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because people are very much afraid. That's the one step. And then also, if you start an organization, and in our case a foundation, and you want to also have a budget for the foundation, you're actually you actually get pointed towards the group that you're sticking up to. But if that group is just earning a very little amount of money, like me when I was 28, 8,000 a year, then you cannot pay 20 euros a month for a union membership. So that's a big practical thing. For instance, our organization, the Platform for Freelance Musicians, is has a very, very small budget, and we don't have an office. We don't have people working for us. It's all voluntary work. If we want to rent a room to have a meeting, that's a thing on our budget. So that's a practical thing, which is hard about it. But mostly it's the fear.
I would, if I can.
Well, I realized I put you. I also had a question to you, and I also realized I asked it in English. If you want to answer in Dutch, that's fine, because the answer however you want, and then we go.
Nee, maar goed, het centrale issue is hier ook weer en dat heeft betrekking op zowel flexibiliteit als op sociale veiligheid. Hoe is de positie van een muzikus ten opzichte van de organisatie waar hij werkt? En die positie wordt bepaald door het contract wat hij heeft. In belangrijke mate. En hoe met dat contract wordt omgegaan. En we proberen daar natuurlijk aan alle kanten afspraken over te maken. Zoals we ook afspraken proberen te maken over van hoe er met de arbeidsvoorwaarden en de arbeidsomstandigheden wordt omgegaan op de werkvloer. En arbeidsomstandigheden, hoe mensen kunnen op een gezonde en op plezierige manier kunnen functioneren. Waardoor ze, en dat is ook wel belangrijk om dat te stipuleren, toch betere muziek kunnen maken. Omdat ze zich gewoon lekker en fijn voelen. En niet de zorgen om zich heen hoeven te hebben van het kunnen rondkomen of anderszins. Tegelijkertijd wordt het wel weer verwacht dat ze ook s'avonds om 8 uur weer met een big smile op dat podium zitten, ook al hebben ze de pest erin. Dat wordt wel stevig onderschat. En zoals net ook gezegd, de passie gewaardeerd. Die passie is aan de ene kant heel sterk, het maakt je sterk, maar aan de andere kant ook weer heel zwak. Kwetsbaar voor mensen die het anders menen. En vandaar dus ook mijn pleidooi om die machtsbalans in orkestorganisaties wat te verbeteren. Om daar onderzoek naar te doen en te kijken van hoe je dat ook in evenwicht met het artistieke product en juist de verbetering van het artistieke product tot wasdom zou kunnen laten komen. Kijk naar de medezeggenschap. Ik wil er één ding over zeggen. Mij toch in het begin van de carrière had ik een bijeenkomst in Den Haag met politici en daar zat ook iemand van het Concertgebouworkest bij. En die zei, eigenlijk willen wij gewoon iemand in het bestuur van de organisatie hebben. Want we hebben als muzici al zo weinig te zeggen. Als we ook niemand meer in het bestuur van de organisatie hebben, omdat dat op dat moment zeg maar de gangbare doctrine was. Echte scheiding tussen het toezichthoudende bestuur en de werkvloer. Ja, dan geeft dat een beetje aan van waar die muzici hun kwetsbaarheid. En dan heb je het ook nog over een heel gerenommeerd orkest. Waarvan je denkt van, hebben die nou op dat punt zorgen? Ja, hebben ze.
So this is a statement. Wait, can you maybe, if you want to, because in 5 minutes we will open the floor, and if we do, then come up here and then I can give you the microphone. So save it for a bit longer, because I actually also wanted to talk about the cold winds facing culture, right? So this has been sort of the analysis of the problems that are already here, but can it get worse? Probably yes. You chose the title, right? Because you were...
I like provoking discussion. I chose the title because I knew I would have really smart people sitting out here who could help answer. And for somebody who spends a good part of the day teaching, I always learn more from my students than they learn from me. That's just how it goes. And I knew that there would be people out there that can help us, because you know, as we used to say in old Union land, united we stand, divided we fall, that there has to be a collectivization of thoughts, that we need empiricists to feed us with wonderful statistics of why culture is a good thing. We need to, you know, we need more people who believe in the fact that Mozart can make your baby become Einstein or something like this, what we like to read in the popular press. But we need that, because that feeds, I've seen this in America, that feeds positive views on culture. And if you have a generic positivism, you can also blow back the cold winds and turn this into Ibiza or something like this, where there's a different kind of culture, but okay. But my point is that there are ways, and there, it's not to fight back, but to prove that culture in its broadest sense is actually good for a country, that it's not something to be afraid of. It's not, you know, just a bunch of anti-woke, white people listening to Beethoven on a Saturday night, for Lord's sake. And that's why I wanted to play something like Die Stadt, so that it shakes you up and it lets you know that culture can also not only provoke, but its positive aspects and also positive economic aspects. You know, go to a concert, go to a hip-hop party. You're going to go out and drink. You're going to go out and eat. You're going to spend money in the town. It's good for a city to have culture, and it's good for a region to have culture. And we can't be afraid to say that all the time and just sort of hide behind this business of, yeah, the Taylor Swift effect. Oh, may she run for president. Sorry.
And Caroline, how do you see the storm coming? Because you already said, like, I don't want to make a differentiation between carnival, low culture, opera, big culture. Is that something you're afraid of that might happen more, or that might be weaponized against musicians?
Yeah, well, sometimes I'm afraid of that. Yeah, that there's this polarization between high culture and lower culture. I mean, it's all culture, and we call it high culture and low culture, and that already makes us a little bit elitist, which is in the eyes of a lot of people a bad thing. And yeah, it's a whole very philosophical question, I think, actually.
But also practical, because they think that we don't work. You know, it's like, you lazy musicians. You know, who said that music was ever employment? And this is, you know, in the part of my book where I talk about U.S., there are cases and cases that discuss, I mean, cases is in jurisprudence that discusses whether musicians work. Oh my gosh, you know, or whether artists work. You know, you're just throwing paint on a canvas, and everybody knows that, you know, your 2-year-old can do that too. That kind of discussion, and if you put that in a court of law, it's absolutely extraordinary. When I ran into those cases, I was shocked. But as long as we polarize and say, y'all don't work, you're singing and dancing and, you know, just raising a ruckus, then that'll put us in a negative light. And there's something, the all-embracive part. I mean, certainly, there's nothing wrong with going out and solo having a great party. Let's do Carnival and let's listen to Beethoven. We can do all of that.
Okay, well,
So
there was
there.
already a question coming from the audience. So I now, before we move on to the closing statements, I want to ask people from the audience, if you have a question, please come up here. Then I can give you a mic, and then everybody can hear you, also the people at home. I don't want to give away my microphone.
Oh, you can take mine. You talk too much earlier.
Thank you very much. Martin, you talked about the failure of the market. Isn't there also the vulnerability with the public, who are used to very cheap ticket prices, which make it very vulnerable, the music market?
The ticket prices, I don't know for sure, but I think that they are in a reasonable amount of money. It depends on the status of the orchestra which is performing. Yeah, but still, it wouldn't, when the cost price is fully scheduled about the whole cost.
You can also do it in Dutch.
Yeah, ik bedoel, als je alle kosten zou meerekenen, dan zouden de kaartjes aanzienlijk duurder uitkomen.
Yeah, but there's a positive note.
Dan nog ben ik het met u eens dat ze zeggen dat de kaartjes te duur zijn. Hè? Dat kan best zo zijn. Of te goedkoop. Nou ja, ik zou dat ze nou juist zeggen van je maakt je nog kwetsbaarder op het moment dat je zegt van nou, de muziek is alleen maar toegankelijk voor mensen met een brede beurs.
That's something I'm really sensitive to. It's a huge discussion. Huge, I shouldn't use that word. In the United States as well. And you know, to say something in French, ça dépend. It depends. If you look at the prices of, let's say, ballet in this country, ballet is cheaper than opera. You know, do the math. Y, G. Look at the sets. Look at what goes into opera. But if you look at nowadays what at least all the Dutch subsidized orchestras and ensembles are doing to have double ticket prices that will charge a lot for those who can, but will give free concerts, will open our halls. I've been reading the subsidy as a tiny little advisor for the Dutch Culture Council, Raad voor Cultuur. I received insider information as to what orchestras are now asking for subsidies. And the percentage of Dutch orchestras who are opening their halls with free concerts, going out in the community. I know Netherlands Philharmonic, for example, opens up the Koepel to people on a Wednesday afternoon. I know the radio orchestras are doing a lot. I know many other orchestras are doing a lot. Sorry, I can't mention you all. But there is a lot of activism on to have like a two-ply system where those who can afford will go on, Saturday afternoon or Saturday night to the Concertgebouw and enjoy their free white wine. And those who can't afford will also have the opportunity, and that's really, really important.
I'm looking for more questions from the audience. If you have, please come up here. I also wanted to add maybe that performing is one of the few jobs that can't be outsourced towards somewhere cheaper where we cannot hear the people complain that they can't live, right? Like our clothes, our food, all these things are made somewhere where it's much easier to ignore that it's not a livable wage. So that's also an interesting perspective. Yeah, another question from the audience.
Yeah, but I don't agree. I really believe that for a long time it has been very invisible that freelance musicians could not live for their money. And it's been since the change of wind and Borslap, and also since the work we've done with the platform and other organizations, the FNV, the Kunstenbond, Creatieve Coalitie, that it has become more visible that there is a problem. So that actually, I am actually quite happy that you say that, because that means that you already have an idea of the problem which has been going on for years in my work field. But I believe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people had no clue. There's been an article in the NRC in 2000 and I believe 19 from a saxophonist, and she was a member of the platform, and she complained about giving free concerts for the Concertgebouw, and people fell off their chairs by surprise about that. There were, I remember a really nice cartoon from Conignan, who had a person in the audience sitting there listening to a violinist, and then the woman was crying, and he said, "Well," and the person next to her was saying, "Like, yeah, it's beautiful, huh? It's beautiful," and she says, "No, I'm crying because of I know what they earn."
Well, it's because traditionally you were told it's good for you. It's good for your resume. It's good for your curriculum vitae. If you play a concert or if you paint a painting and it hangs on this wall, it's good for you. It's good if you dance for free because they'll notice you, and who knows, you might be a star. That was the mantra. That was the line.
Yeah, you get paid at exposure.
Yes.
And then if you have all that exposure, you still can pay the rent. Okay, a question.
I have a quick question about the 3 E's. So we've got in Dutch, educatie, economy, education, economy, erfgoed, our inheritance from the music. How do we convince the world without having to sell ourselves that music is actually an art, is something that we need and is essential for children's development, for the economy of the country, and for what they are now calling populist or nationalist movement, that it's our heritage, which seems like a good way to frame it, considering this political landscape we have.
You could also add health into that, because there are now a lot of studies, scientific studies, about the effects of, most specifically, actually, classical music and Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. They're, feed that into the.
Yeah, it's a very, very relevant statement, actually, what you're making. How it's a difficult thing, because I feel that, especially for classical music, that it's and also perhaps for jazz improvisation, etc., that it's not something that you just wake up one day and you start listening to it and you appreciate it right away. I mean, I kind of have to. Sometimes you do, but you have to learn it, huh? And we need to have an educational system for that.
Well,
So
now
we
with
used
budget
to-
cuts
Yeah,
and education, that's
we used to have the gemeentelijke muziekscholen, which they killed, and I find that terrible. I mean, that was the way to also to have this nivellation. Hoe zeg je dat?
trickle-down effects of. Yeah, if you don't have music schools, and if kids, we talk about diversity until we're blue in the face, and then people will always say,
That stuff.
how come our orchestras are, so white or Asian, if you're going to go there? Another discussion. It's very simple. People, if you don't have extremely wealthy parents or caretakers to pay for your lessons, be it music or ballet or whatever, in the arts, how the heck are you going to reach the level where you can play in a competitive arena? It's not going to happen. So, this begins at home. We have to start with a re-education at schools. And there has to be, if you don't realize that sport is good for kids and music is good for kids, then there's something wrong with you, because they're on equal par, or not only classical music, but creativity. If we read the fact that our PABOs are the PABOs are the educational institutions that educate teachers in the Netherlands, if they have cut 80% of cultural education for our future educators, then what do you have? We have kids who don't even know Christmas carols. Sorry to be so old-fashioned. But, I mean, it's not part of your culture at all. And then if you don't have a household or a community situation where music, art, dance, and I don't really care what kind of, I come from the orchestral world, but let it be any kind of, I'm a populist at heart. It doesn't matter what flavor it is, but if you're not exposed to it at all, then you have, kids going to the Rijksmuseum once a year and laughing at the art, and then, getting on their cell phones, and they can hardly wait till they get out of there. It should be the other way around. They should be fighting to be able to go.
Okay. We're entering the last 10 minutes of the panel. So I'm looking at the audience once again, and if there's or if you want to save your questions for the drinks afterwards.
Magic words.
There are drinks? Okay, I'll ask a question. No, please.
Am I keeping people away from drinks now? Because that's not a good start. I have a question. I work for Platform ACT, which was mentioned a couple of times. We have founded 4 years ago as an organization to improve the working conditions of professionals in the cultural and creative sector. So not only musicians, but the whole broad spectrum of the cultural and creative sector. That is an introduction. What we find, and you touched it a couple of times, all of you touched it a couple of times in your introductions, is that it's really hard to do collective bargaining when the sector is so not collective, as in organized. And you discussed the part of the workers, the professionals who are not very organized, but it's not only the employees or the freelancers, it's also the employers' associations. If you look at it from above, in like a helicopter view, these employer associations are so small that they don't have the power to start a conversation on how can we improve the working conditions of our subsector. So there could be pop musicians, design sector, film sector, etc., etc. And if they don't have the actual headspace, nor the budget, nor the time to do that, it will never improve. So my question to you is, because of your background and are academic because of the research, how can we try to solve this, not only for musicians, but in a much broader sense for the sector as a whole? Because then you can also stand up to maybe populist politicians saying this sector is 3.7% of our GDP, and it has over 300,000 people working in it. Not 60,000 farmers, but 360,000 people working in it, as an example. So
I think it's a very brilliant comment. It just gets me to a quote that, or they often said that organizing freelancers is like organizing cats. It's impossible because they go in all kinds of directions. But a lot of it is a solidarity thing, and I think, old-fashioned that I am, it's a belief that a union or a platform is good for you. My first day with a contract in my hand, it was Netherlands Chamber Orchestra in this country. I joined a union, and I remember my colleagues to the person said, "Why? They'll bargain for you anyway." And I remember, this is years ago. This is more than 30 years ago. I said, "What do you mean? You join because of what they do for you." And coming from the United States, like I know several of us do in the room, you starve as a musician if you're not a union member, because that's part of, there's a different background to that, which I discuss, but you have to. And that respect for collectivism is something here, I think it goes against maybe a national grain of we're all very independent, we're independent thinkers, they'll do it anyway. But I always thought it was a matter of any collective is stronger than an individual voice. And if you feel vulnerable at whatever work you do, be it at a school or a factory or whatever, if you don't band together with others, look at our Uber drivers, etc., in those cases. If vulnerables do not band together, then you remain like cats, which are, they're wonderful animals, but you sure can't organize them.
Okay. First Martin, and then you for the last comment, answer, statement of this panel. And please take the mic that's in front of you. Yeah.
Er zijn vanavond al een paar onderwerpen gepasseerd die eigenlijk belangrijk zijn in de hele discussie over collectivisering. Je kunt het natuurlijk heel erg betrekken op belangenbehartiging, maar ik denk dat het ook van belang is om het maar eens met een misschien wel wolkterm te zeggen, tussen de oren bij de mensen moet landen, dat zij zich moeten verenigen om hun eigen positie te versterken. En dat kan je alleen maar bereiken door daar langdurige campagnes op te zetten. Door het duidelijk te maken van, u kunt uw positie alleen verbeteren als daar echt serieus aan gewerkt wordt. En dat betekent niet alleen lid worden van een organisatie, maar ook actief zijn in die organisatie. Samen dingen oppakken en ontwikkelen. En dat geldt zowel aan de werkgeverszijde als aan de werknemerszijde. Allebei. Want dat tekort wat je aanspreekt in organisaties, natuurlijk, dat merken wij ook. Ik zat eraan te denken toen je dat zei, dat ik in het begin van mijn carrière ooit eens aan de wieg heb gestaan van het oprichten van een werkgeversorganisatie. Want we dachten van, die moet je toch hebben om uiteindelijk een collectieve arbeidsovereenkomst te kunnen afsluiten. Daar heb je 2 partijen voor nodig.
Okay.
En als die partij er niet is, dan stimuleer je dat zo'n partij wordt opgericht. Alleen, daarmee is het niet gedaan. Je moet dus er actief aan werken om het ook voor elkaar te krijgen.
So we need to actively work to make it happen.
Dan zie je dus dat daar muzici vaak afhaken, omdat ze eigenlijk veel liever muziek maken. En dat snap ik heel goed. Alleen, die andere kant van de medaille, die moet ook opgepoetst worden. En daar moet je toch echt tijd, aandacht en energie in stoppen. Wil je ooit wat kunnen bereiken. En dat kun je alleen maar samen.
Okay.
Last words. What Martin says is actually quite true. But it's not only that musicians want to make music rather than fighting for the rights of the group. It's also that it's kind of Well, it's not always appreciated by your employers if you stick up for the rights of your co-workers. And I believe that's also the reason why some members of, for instance, our working groups at the platform for freelance musicians would like to stay anonymous and who do a lot of work, but they don't want to make it clear that they're doing it. And also for both for Doreen and me, we have noticed effects which were kind of severe at some points. So you get to be punished for sticking up for the good. So that's an extra reason. But I believe your question was actually also more like, how can we get the employers to unite? Yeah, on both sides. Yeah, of course, we need to unite, but we also need to focus on different forms of uniting. I feel that the old days where everybody was a member of the union, I am not sure if we're going to get that back again. Because solidarity, it's not something that people want to pay for on a monthly basis. People want to pay for on a monthly basis also to get something immediate in return. And that's difficult. And I don't know how we can get the employers to unite. And what I would like to say is that we focus a lot on the basis infrastructure, the basic infrastructure in Holland, the BIS. But there is a lot going on around that, which is not being subsidized, and which is also a big part of the employers with us. And it's very hard to organize those kind of groups as well. But I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that we need to unite as musicians, even though solidarity is perhaps not the most popular thing. It's one of the voorwaarden. Conditions to achieve something. That with putting it on paper, because when it's not on paper, it doesn't exist. So write everything down.
So, with these words, I want to thank the three panelists again. You for writing everything down and collecting the data. You for the courage you have and the things you've done so far, and also your time and thoughts on this panel. And you similarly for the time and the analysis on this panel. A big round of applause, please. And then I forgot to mention the book that Heather wrote is for sale over there with a discount only today. So woohoo, go there. This night was organized by SPUI 25 and the Faculty of Law. And yeah, this was it. Sorry.